Hi everyone, it's Beyza Bilal. Today I will be conducting this interview for Political Wellbeing platform, and we will have two mental health professionals today, Shruti and Pooja. We will be talking about the term well-being, which is very widely used globally in today's world. However, we would like to discuss it more from more queer feminist perspectives about the discussion. But first, let's start with knowing Shruti and Pooja more closer, then I will give floor to them. Shruti Chakravarty has 20 years of experience in nonprofit as mental health practitioner, researcher, trainer, and social worker. Her areas of engagement have been mental health, gender, and sexuality from rights-based perspective. She has an independent therapeutic practice based in Mumbai, has in-depth experience working with LGBTQIA plus clients in the therapeutic space, and has co-authored Queer Affirmative Counseling Practice, a resource book for mental health practitioners in India. She has completed her PhD on the subject of queer intimacies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And Shruti is Chief Advisor at Mariwala Health Initiative and also faculty at the Queer Affirmative Counseling Practice course. Additionally, she is Assistant Professor of Psychology at Krea University. So welcome, Shruti. And Pooja Noir has been part of nonprofit sector for over a decade. She has worked as a researcher, documentation consultant, and trainer. She is a counselor with an independent therapeutic practice based in Bombay. She has Master of Philosophy from Tata Institute of Social Sciences as well, and has worked in the areas of life skills training, curriculum development, feminist theory, gender, sexuality, violence, and child sexual abuse. She is also visiting faculty at the psychology department at Krea University. Additionally, she is consultant therapist with Mariwala Health Initiative and is also faculty at their flagship Queer Affirmative Psych Counseling Practice course, as well as co-author of the Queer Affirmative Counseling Practice resource book for mental health practitioners in India. Pooja also conducts trainings on peer counseling and suicide prevention in the LGBTQI plus community. So actually, as I say, welcome again, Shruti and Pooja. As your engagement in gender and sexuality and feminist theories, and you are also contributing a lot with the resources and the trainings and courses. So as queer feminist therapists working on the ground, I would like to hear you about your journey with queer feminist perspective, how you search for it for inside of yourself.
Sure. I think let me start. It was about 20 years ago when I was studying psychology, and I was learning about how being lesbian and being gay was actually a disease and abnormal. And at the same time, I was beginning to realize my attractions towards women. So as a woman, I was recognizing that I'm getting interested in women. And I was studying, however, that that's abnormal. So there was a lot of contradiction inside me, right? Because what I felt was so right, but what I was being taught was that it was wrong. So that actually began my journey into exploring this contradiction between who I am and how I am perceived by society and the stigma. Because as I said before, it felt right. It felt normal to me from within, but everything around me was saying that's not okay. And I found some of my answers in actually queer feminism. There was a group in Bombay back then. I was able to access a group of feminist lesbians, bisexual women, trans persons. And through them, I was able to recognize that we are actually living in a society that socially constructs these ideas of what is normal sexuality, what is normal love, what is a normal gender, what is a normal body, right? And I began to realize that all of it was actually not based in anything natural, but actually based in our social ideas of normal, abnormal, and that was socially constructed. So at the very beginning, I was able to understand, thanks to queer feminism, that our society is sort of creating ideas of normal, abnormal. And not only is it creating these ideas, it is then hierarchizing it and saying one is better than the other. And that's when I began to understand social inequalities. But perhaps I can explain more a bit later. But this was the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And which is very common all around the world for all societies as well. For Pooja, how is your journey?
I'm trying to think on two levels now. One is on how to describe my journey, and the other also is how does one give due credit to political thought as well as personal labor. And I think that becomes the thread that connects all our challenges. You know, political thought has been like that life raft that has saved us during extremely turbulent times, that has saved me during extremely turbulent times. And I still also want to give some credit to how I have engaged with political thought, what my labor has been in it as well. So I think this kind of back and forth, or not a back and forth, perhaps this kind of a liminal space between thought and personal action, I think it is symbolic of feminist engagement as well, where one does not annihilate the self, but one sort of grows through political thought. And I think my journey also began with this search for something that could help alleviate pain. The pain that I was experiencing in terms of how do I engage with my sexuality, how do I build a life that is authentic or that speaks to my sexuality, how do I let go of the pain I was carrying as a survivor of child sexual abuse, as a survivor of other kinds of violence in interpersonal or intimate spaces. So yeah, it began with pain relief, but I did not know that it would actually take me into a space of creating something as well, into a space of creativity and growth and developing something that was concrete and then could be offered to others. So I think that's where the journey of personal into then trying to teach, trying to create curriculum, or trying to speak to others. But of course, there was a sequence there. I had to work with myself before I thought there was something to talk to others about. Yeah, so that's briefly, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and it shows us how this personal is political, but also practice and science is as well connected to that spaces. So from that point, how you are approaching the term, the concept, which is widely discussed all around the world, the well-being from your queer feminist perspectives.
So as queer feminists, of course, we do have an opinion on everything. And well-being is also one of those topics that we do have certain strong feelings towards. And the first one is a kind of pushback on the idea of well-being that exists today. That well-being is about green tea, and that well-being is about yoga. And then, of course, in our context, yoga has many other associations as well. So well-being as everyday routine things or certain, very mundane, I think, practices of is an idea that we've tried to push back. At the same time, we also need to develop our ideas of well-being, right? What would a queer feminist idea be? We know what it is not. We know it is not salads for dinner, but what is it then, therefore? And in that, I think a queer feminist approach to well-being begins with an admission of everything that is wrong. We try to, and I think our development of a critique of inequality, of a critique of power, a critique of violence, all of this critique is the foundation for developing an idea of well-being. There is, and it's not a denial or some sort of how do you say, like a whitewashing of everything that goes on, and then try to create islands of practices which have nothing to do with the world. So when you locate the individual in many things that are troubling, in unequal structures and all, and then if we were to talk about well-being, the first point would be to see how unequal structures will not let you realize well-being. So I think the helplessness is also a recognition in that process. You realize that you might just be powerless against some very big forces, processes, structures, etc. And then I think from there you build, from that point on, you build.
It sounds that when you start to search, investigate, and it sounds like very similar to violence. When a person starts to say it is violence, then it is somehow more easier to start to cope with. So I hear it in that way as well. For Shruti, how about you? How you are approaching well-being?
So I think traditionally therapy has always looked at individual and kept the social aside, as if the individual is not embedded in the social. And furthermore, what we need to recognize is that the social is an unequal social, which means that there are communities of people based on their social locations that are oppressed. So queer feminism or well-being in queer feminism has to first account for this reality, the individual and their location in the landscape of social inequality. And when you're on the receiving end of that inequality, the impacts on your mental health have to be considered, taking that social inequality landscape into context. So I think that's an important contribution of queer feminism, the individual in the unequal social, right? I keep on harping on the unequal because it is actually the unequal that impacts the psyche, right? So that was my point. And also then what would well-being look like? Then if it is not, it cannot simply be the mundane routines of care. Then when we say well-being, we are talking about stigmatized, devalued personhood, erased personhoods. And then well-being is a restoration of that. It's a restoration of that identity that does not find voice and value in the mainstream, right? It is an upholding of dignity, of agency. So I see well-being, both Pooja and me, and I think we all agree that well-being is about actually valuing the erased, stigmatized self in that unequal system. And that's what we can do in therapy.
Yeah, from that point, what I would like to go on with of course, as you mentioned, it was not just solely focused on individual, but individual stated in inequal social systems and structures. So, but at the same time, you are working with queer people in therapeutic settings. You are working together with individuals and probably on group level, you are also working with. So based on this your approach, how you are practically use these backgrounds into your therapeutic settings?
So I think in our work, what we try to do, firstly, there is no new way of doing therapeutic work with LGBTQI plus community. We're trying to figure what needs to be fixed or changed in our current ways of doing therapy or conventional or traditional ways of doing therapy in order to one, not harm, and two, benefit. And these two are two different processes in therapy, right? You're trying not to damage and you are trying to get something good out of the process. And both require different and separate kinds of attention. So one is that. And secondly, we try to really stick to the basics. When we are saying therapeutic work, how does a practitioner do therapeutic work with the LGBTQI community? We are not starting with talking about the LGBTQI plus community. We are saying what is happening to this practitioner who is also trained in regimes of heterosexuality, cisgenderism, patriarchy. So what is happening to the practitioner? We will continue to focus on the practitioner. We will not, we still will not go into telling you what L stands for and G stands for. How can we begin that without any idea of what we are up against? You know, what is the shape of this proverbial beast that we're trying to counter in this very intimate one-on-one setting of therapy? And in that, all the work, I think, and we do prepare our therapists who do this course also for what lies ahead, in the sense all of it is reflexivity. It is your work with yourself. We will tell you we are not here to teach you techniques. There are no separate list of techniques which you teach these strange alien creatures who don't live in your housing societies and who don't work at your workplace, and you might just see them in this very clinical setting. You know, later, we'll get to it later. We have to talk about you and what heterosexism does to you, how it impacts the ways in which you view a queer client. And that impacts the work you do. So when we come to practice, principle, etc., the very fundamental value is it's all about the therapist. And I think over time, even in the history of psychology, we did sort of start off focusing on the therapist, but along the way, we became very technique and tool focused. You know, do these 10 things when a client with anxiety comes, do these 20 actions when a client with depression comes. And we became so technique focused that we are not, and it still hasn't meant that the practitioner has disappeared, right? The practitioner is still there in the room, has not gone anywhere. What is going on over there? How can we not see the impact of the practitioner's homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia that could impact all these very wonderful tools that they are equipped with? And therefore, in terms of principles, practices, etc., we have built this course which focuses very strongly on reflexivity. And it's the same thing that we try to do in our practice. Reflect on one's own biases, on one's own homophobia, transphobia, and then in that space of reflexivity, you realize you can experience things changing. Then the way you do therapy changes, because now you are implicating yourself as well in it.
So I am hearing like it is while creating safe spaces for the clients, it seems that you are also creating these progressive spaces for the therapists or mental health professional in the room as well, by always taking these all normative things in the room within the person as well. So for Shruti, would you like to add something about your practice?
Sure. So in addition to what Pooja said, one is, of course, reflexivity about one's own power and prejudice as practitioners who may not be from a stigmatized or marginalized community. So that is something that is very essential work. Yeah, if we understand the individual in the unequal social, then if you're privileged as a practitioner, you have to be able to, work through that prejudice. Also, in my practice, I think it would be important that the connections that I make, the individual, the social, the privilege and the oppression, in different ways, of course, with the readiness of the client and in a language that the client understands and works with, we make these connections explicit. We really need to be able to recognize the social inequality and how it plays out. So when we talk of love, when we talk of bodies and sexualities and what are the discourses out there, and how are some of the right-wing forces controlling us, how they are mobilizing in order to suppress us. I mean, I may use, of course, very different language, but these are my thought processes. Yeah, I'm really working with the client to help the client make these connections and also see themselves as part of those connections. Thirdly, I think an important work that we do in the therapy room is to recognize that distress that the client is experiencing inside is socially located. Yeah, it is not that I am abnormal, yeah, but the perception of me in society, that makes people behave a certain way. So negative attitudes, negative rules that society has, that impacts me. I'm not distressed because I'm gay. I am distressed because the society thinks it's wrong for me to be gay. So that connection also helps, because so many queer people are experiencing a range of unique life stresses. There's invisibility, there's trans and homonegativity, there is, relationship concerns like everybody has. You have to come out, you have to live double lives, but all of this has to be situated in the social context of there are negative consequences when I try to live my authentic life. And what does that do to me? How does it snatch away my possibilities to live a fuller life? So when we work in the therapy room, it is by locating the self in these contexts of societal negativity and its relationship to distress that we find there's some movement.
It seems it's so powerful practice as well. And yeah, from that point that Shruti you shared, maybe we can go on with the individual in the room and its connection with social. But let's look at this from also the all political structure, like working the person on itself and working one's desires, working the fear of the other. So while working all these issues, what do you think about what it says about the right wing ideologies, how it functions against these constructed right wing ideologies around the world?
Okay. So first of all, when you framed this question and sent it to us, it was really exciting to get thinking on these questions. And I think if we are in the business of teaching or training, etc., one would appreciate getting that space to air one's own thoughts as well, and not only be listening to others. And to make some of these connections, which at times we don't have the luxury of, because we have to also stick to a brief. But it does not mean that the work we are doing is unconnected from so many other things. So, and then of course, desire and the other is such an integral part of how we understand gender and sexuality. Desire, the other, and the fear of the other. Because very often, and we encounter that fear of the other because there are times when we perhaps begin with saying, oh, well, maybe the gap is only information. If we provide information, if people know, they will be okay. They are only struggling under not knowing what the other is. And then so you try to provide information, you tell them what queer means and what LGBT is and who is a lesbian, who is a trans person. You provide information. And then all of us have realized that just the providing of information has not really led to a lot of what we might seek as change, right? And in today's day and age, information is at the tip of your finger. It's a Google search is all it takes on the internet. So then you're thinking, okay, I was told that it was an information gap. I tried to provide information, but nothing has significantly changed. And that's where you are then forced to reckon with other kinds of gaps, which are far more deeper than a need for information. And in that, I think the binary of normal, abnormal holds a lot of power in trying to control this whole system. Normal is so good and abnormal is so bad that one wants to be normal. There is that desire to be normal. So that's one. The second thing is that the normal requires an abnormal as well. My feeling good about being normal is dependent on you providing me with a really terrible abnormal. Unless that offsets my idea of a normal, I cannot take any pleasure in being normal also. So give me a really terrible abnormal if you can, if you please. So the normal also needing an abnormal at all times. So the other, I mean, there's so much that feminists and other scholars have talked about the need for an other, right? So the need for an other also has to be acknowledged at this point. And the third thing I want to say here is, suppose you find yourself as the other. How does that impact you? Because you realize that very often these are only states of being. You just are. You did not put yourself in one or the other box. You just find yourself in one or the other box. You just happen to be in one or the other box. And so many of us in the community, when we talk about our personal stories, have talked about how the grip of that love or attraction was just too powerful to deny. So it's not as if I just woke up one day and thought, let me try out lesbianism. Looks like heterosexuality is a bore. Lesbianism felt like this undeniable truth. I mean, I better acknowledge it, for my own. I mean, I would deny it at my own peril. So we find ourselves in the other, and then how do we engage with that too? Then take such complex forms in each person's journey. So yeah, just a few thoughts on the normal and the other. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and also all these binaries are very useful for right-wing ideologies around the world as well. So your words is gives meaning against this as well to me. For Shruti, how about you?
Right. So I think the right-wing ideologies are very clear in their goal of a divided society, right? And in order to maintain that division and that hierarchy and that power inequality, the creation of the other in different ways, as Pooja has already said, becomes necessary. And gender and sexuality is one of the axes on which the right wing, so our desires are weaponized against us, right? By creating this abnormal, normal, good, bad, deviant, pure binaries. And the entire, if we really join the dots, we will be able to recognize that in creating a fear about our desires, the queer desires, the right wing is actually consolidating its position as the superior heterosexual, cisgender, capitalist, masculine force. So I think we must be aware of how that happens, but we are needed in order for that to be maintained, right? And therefore my response to that is, I love saying this line, queer is my normal, okay? I don't care for other normals. Queer is my normal. And why that becomes a political statement is because the right wing creates dominant narratives of a good life. Yeah, it says this is how you need to live in order to have a good life. And the queer life is not a good life, is the counter message. But queer people, trans people, people on the margins are going in and saying that good life actually messes with me. It's not my good life. Yeah, I'm at the receiving end of inequality. And let me tell you what a good life is. And in doing so, the margins creates a counter narrative to that dominant narrative. Yeah, it says this is how you move towards an equal and just world. This is how you fight inequality. So queer is my normal is actually the margin creating counter narratives. And then counter narratives of desire can actually bring down heterosexuality. I truly believe that. And with that, the system of this power can crumble. No wonder they fear us.
I just wanted to add
Sure.
one thing to this response as well. It's that, you know, if you place all of this on the table, right wing, normal, the binaries of normal, abnormal, and what people experience as individuals when they find themselves in either of these spaces, fear, etc. In all of this, I think one realizes that the normal is constructed. Everything else just exists. Everything is just is. You know, in therapy also we work so much with what is, right? People just are. But the normal is constructed. And it presents a standard to be, which I don't think even people who happen to find themselves in the normal box can conform to. Everyone is just, it's like the construct of the ideal woman. Like, there is no ideal woman. Everyone just will die or spend their lives trying to become the ideal woman. That's how the normal also functions. So it's important to also see that the normal is something nobody can achieve. It is meant to be that idea that nobody can achieve, because otherwise, how do you harness people's unhappiness about not being normal? How do you then mobilize people along certain oppressive ideologies like the right wing? How do you mobilize them? Because you have to give them an ideal that they'll never reach, and then you tell them you will help them reach there. So the fact that the normal is constructed, number one, and second, nobody's ever going to get there, also helps create unhappiness that allows for mobilizing to happen based on narrow ideologies, whereas others just are.
Yeah, so it seems like since this constructed a normative world, while of course I personally consider them important, but like right-wing, right-based advocacies is important, since there is something constructed as well. But at the same time, what I am hearing, it is like more wider scope of existence and like meaning in life, and like at the same time the well-being. From your queer feminist perspective, I heard more than, not only, but more than right-based advocacies. It is really integrated to very like existence of whole people around the world as well, just from taking perspective from more queer feminist perspective. So my last questions will be about, what do you think, what says queer feminism about life and like struggle, like political struggle and existence for you?
So I'll go first on this one. Both Pooja and me have a long history of being associated with queer feminist movements in India, collective spaces. So I just wanted to share a few values of collective functioning of, what we understand as progressive values, or, creating safe spaces for us on the margins. Right. And I'd list a few, and then Pooja, you can, of course, add your thoughts. So I was thinking that that one form of resistance, to these ideologies is the collectivizing, and the people movements that we build, right? I think it's an important part for resistance, solidarity, even feeling ourselves as being reflected, in other people, right? So some of the values that can make spaces like this perhaps safe and progressive and would be, one is to recognize that unlike the rest of the capitalist world, a collective or people's movements is so much about collaboration and working together and not competing. with each other. We are so used to a hierarchical world that actually working collaboratively has become a radical idea. It's sad, but true. Yeah. The other is that when we are working together, how does one arrive at decisions, ideas, suggestions? And what I've learned very powerfully is the power of consensus. Yeah, where all voices are heard, all opinions are taken on board, and then together, by talking to each other, brainstorming, we arrive together at a decision. That's consensus. Unlike, again, that top-down narrative of I know best for you because my normal is socially constructed as superior. So consensus. And a little bit, I wanted to also talk about care. Activism having a certain agenda, but also the need for care and nurturance. And it almost seems like a binary. So I wanted to comment on that by saying that if we are able to recognize that in our activisms, the resistance, the solidarity, the ability to see more people like myself, that itself is care and well-being. Just knowing, just standing together with, that is well-being. So I just want to end with saying that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Pooja?
So in addition to what Shruti said, I'd like to say that in terms of life, struggle, space, all of this, one of the things that's been most challenging for me, and also something I believe a lot in, is the ability to engage with conflicts. And I'm not talking about violence here, I'm talking about conflict. So the how I think one assumes that a safe space or a good life is a life devoid of conflict, or devoid a space that is devoid of conflict. People just get along with each other magically, stop being who they are, and somehow that kind of that to me represents an uneasy calm. It is a calm which is very, very shallow, which over time can build up into an extremely unsafe space. It can build into a life where it only appears to be good. So I think our approach to engaging with conflict has to change. And that's something we have to work on as well. And as I said, personally, it has been a struggle for me to bring up conflict, to encounter it, to even stay for the duration of working through the conflict. You know, that staying power also has to go up in that sense, I think. So conflict-free as unsafe is what I'm talking about. If we declare a space as safe, it means it is a space where you can bring up conflict. And the second part of that is it is a space where you can bring up grievances. It is not a safe space if there is no system for grievance redressal. People will be unhappy. There could be different reasons. There could be complaints. It will always happen if, I mean, even the same individual experiences conflict within. So why are we denying two different individuals to have conflict between them? You know, so denying of conflict is dangerous. And if we want to imagine queer feminism and queer feminist spaces, I think what queer feminism has also, what it tells us is the birth of queer feminism was in a tension between queer and feminist, right? It was not a very organic sort of coming together. There was tension between earlier feminisms and queer theorists, and that tension is what birthed queer feminism. So I feel that focusing on tension, giving it its due, giving conflict its due, giving grievances their due is extremely essential to function as queer feminists, to keep creating spaces which are not simply safe because I said so, because Pooja said it is safe, that not like that. So to really work on that, I think this would be extremely important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions. So actually, I think if there could be a chance, we will discuss and talk for hours and hours around these issues. So I want to ask you if you want to contribute anything or for your last verse, then I will try to close this conversation for now to keep it for the future.
Thank you actually for this chance to connect, because I think that we do experience some amount of isolation, that our sort of ideology of life, queer feminism, it doesn't have enough takers. So it's really great to know that across the globe, there are queer feminists who are invested in social justice, in social change, in well-being, in critiques, and in building counter narratives that will serve not just us actually, but all the people across the board, whether you're marginalized or privileged. So thank you for a chance at this conversation. It's been lovely.
I completely echo Shruti's sentiment as well. A lot of gratitude to connect with those who are also very proudly saying queer feminist. And that as a bridge, I think how queer feminist of us to only connect on queer feminism. We might have very little else in common, and here we are talking, and that's really, I think, very queer feminist of us to have had this conversation as well. So thank you very much for that opportunity. It's always very nourishing to think and talk. And as you might have seen, we were also just building off of each other as we were talking. And that's such an exciting experience always. And the other thing I wanted to thank you for is this opportunity to continue to talk about the individual and the social political not as binaries, and the way we keep going back and forth, because otherwise traditionally psychologists only want to talk individual, others are saying no, activists are saying political, but it's not two different boxes without any connection to each other. And I think those of us who occupy this space between these two boxes, I think are at an exciting time in history right now, to be able to occupy this liminal space between the individual and the political. So thank you very much. Very grateful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much as well. It was very honored to have you today in this interview. Even we are in different geographies, maybe within different communities, and working very various people around. It was very nice to have finding a common space that bringing us some ideas together in order to build these perspectives as well. So thank you so much, and I hope you very good day. And now just stopping the record.